Professor Tenzer, it's great to be chatting with you again. We're flipping the script this time. Last time we spoke about the LSAT and you were interviewing me, and now we're hearing from you about law school prep, how to succeed on exams. And right before we hit record, you said something really interesting to me, which was that you can't prepare for law school. It's about what you could do during law school to prep for exams. Could you elaborate on that?
All right, so I guess the way to elaborate is to explain what we teach in law school. So I'm going to give you the hypothetical that I give all the time. Every semester I walk in 2 minutes late to my class, very harried, and I tell a story about how my next door neighbor and I were in a tiff, and I went over to have words with her, and as I was leaving, my adorable cockapoo Muffy was scratching on the door and wanted to take a walk with me. I went over, I talked to my friend Patty, or not even my friend, and we got into a verbal argument. And Muffy, who has been with me for 12 years, is fiercely loyal, got so upset by the argument that she bit my next door neighbor. And I was charged with assault with a dangerous instrument, Muffy being the dangerous instrument. Now I will ask you, do you think that a adorable 12-year-old fiercely loyal cockapoo can be a dangerous instrument? I want your honest opinion.
I suspect that your dog would not be considered a dangerous instrument.
And why not?
Because that's not the conventional use for little Muffy.
Fair enough. And did you need to go to law school to make that argument?
No, that seems like fairly common sense to me.
Exactly. And so the question is, if all the law that you need is on the internet and everyone knows how to argue, I have 3 children, I know that they all know how to argue, then why are you going to law school? And the answer is because the reality is that you can't tell me whether Muffy is a dangerous instrument unless you understand, number one, that a dangerous instrument is something used in a dangerous way, and number two, that the court is going to look at how courts have treated previous dangerous instruments. So one of the things they're going to look at is the fact that I knew the dog was fiercely loyal. If I knew it was fiercely loyal, maybe I used it in a dangerous way. On the other hand, she was 12 years old, and my intent was to go over and have words, not to bring Muffy for the intention to bite my neighbor. And those arguments weigh against. So what we teach you in law school is how to read a case and how to argue facts of a hypothetical case or a new case or whatever your client's case is, based on the cases that we read in class. And that's a very long way of saying to me, there's nothing you can do to get ready for law school before you go to law school. So the summer before, and I actually have a podcast about this on my podcast, lawtofact.com, I interviewed 2 students and I said, what'd you do the summer before? 2 top students. One hiked the Appalachian Trail and the other worked in a bar. Because we're not teaching you, well, let me rephrase this. We are teaching you law, but we're really teaching you how to think like a lawyer. How to think in a way that's different than people who don't go to law school. And so you can't teach yourself that, and that's why you can't prepare before law school. And my suggestion is before you go to law school, do something that you'll never get to do once you're in law school.
That's a great point. So you're suggesting the summer before, just relax and have your one last hurrah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I think a lot of people will be happy to hear that they can relax and with guilt-free. But what about the gunners? I know I'm going to hear from people who are like, there must be something I could do. There's a variety of books out there. There are even some 1L summer prep courses. Are you suggesting that those aren't valuable or just not worthwhile? Or how do you frame that decision?
Okay, so the first thing I tell everyone to do is watch my 2 favorite movies, Legally Blonde and The Paper Chase. Because believe it or not, those 2 movies will prepare you for law school. The first day in Legally Blonde, on the first day of class, Elle Woods gets called on and she's not prepared and the teacher gets furious, and that in fact can happen. Here's the thing about the prep classes, and I have to be honest, I teach in a summer prep class for diversity students. I look at the prep classes as the first bite of an apple. So if you are inclined to take one of those prep classes, understand that you're not taking them to learn constitutional law and you're not taking them to learn criminal law. You're taking them to learn how to be a law student, because the best law students are the ones who understand how to be a law student. So I call those the first bite of the apple, your first exposure to practicing briefing and all of that stuff. So I'm not adverse to them so long as you understand why you're going. And it's because the other thing I'll say, Steve, is that one of the favorite statements or cliches, I should say, among law professors is you take the professor, not the class. So 5 different professors will teach criminal law 5 different ways. So if you take it from one professor over the summer and then you take it from the professor that's grading you over the fall, you've got to speak to the professor that's grading you over the fall.
That makes a lot of sense. Professors differ, their emphases differ, their styles differ. So going in first week of law school, let's assume that our student knows nothing at all.
Okay.
What common mistakes might they make in the first week or first couple of weeks, and how could they do things right in terms of avoiding falling behind, getting prepped for the exams? What should they be doing? What should they not be doing?
Okay, great. That's a great question. So the biggest mistake that students make is that they pull their briefs off the internet. Let me take a step back. Law school is taught through the Socratic method. Students read cases before they come to class. They brief the cases, which means they identify the issue. They spot the issue. They figure out the legally significant facts, the rule, the reasoning, and the holding. And then in class, a professor may start with what happened in this particular case. In fact, it's interesting because in the paper chase, the first case they ask is Hawkins versus McGee, which is the first case I teach in contracts also. So students will basically are worried that they're not right because they're new law students. So they'll whip the brief off the internet. But the problem with that is that they're robbing themselves of the opportunity to learn how to spot issues and how to think like a lawyer. So the worst thing you can do is rob yourself of the opportunity to learn this new skill of thinking differently. And so you want to make sure that you are briefing the cases yourself. Now, I would say in the beginning, the rule of thumb is 3 hours of studying to 1 hour of class. You know, you're in class 12 hours a week. What are you doing with the rest of the class? By the way, the American Bar Association used to have a rule that you're not allowed to work at all your first year of law school. I think it's now you can work a little bit because they recognize the cost of law. But you should spend 3 hours per week studying. So if there's anything you want to do before you go to law school, it's to have a sense of how to brief a case. But it's a little bit of trial by fire you're going to learn once you're in there. And know that even if you're wrong, first of all law school exams are anonymously graded. So even if you're wrong, the professor will never know it. But also understand that if you are wrong, that's a great learning moment because it'll help you learn what's right.
Gotcha. No, thanks. That's a really valuable insight to share. I think that students teaching themselves the process is ultimately the most important thing of all. Now, I know that in terms of briefing cases, issue spotting, one thing that comes up a lot is IRAC.
Yes,
IRAC.
I love IRAC.
Yeah, could you go into a bit of
not
depth?
The country, yes.
Into
the country's probably wonderful too.
Not as relevant to law school as well. IRAC, IRAC, for those
Right.
who aren't aware. Could you just give a brief rundown? What is that? Why is it useful?
Sure. Okay. So let me again step back because what you're going to do when you're in law school, and I won't forget your question, but plan on the first month of law school being about mastering how to spot issues, how to really brief cases. Plan on, actually, I would almost say 2/3 are only about staying prepared for class, reading all the cases, doing the note problems in the cases yourself, because those are problems professors may ask on exams, and then kind of getting familiar. And then the last third can be what we call outlining, putting everything together. And then you're going to take your exams. So where IRAC comes in is when you're taking an exam or working on your memorandums of law, which every first year law student has to do. IRAC is issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. So if we go back to whether Muffy is a dangerous instrument, the issue would be, is Muffy a dangerous instrument, right? The rule would be the rule that I told you before, which is a dangerous instrument is something that's used in a dangerous way. The analysis, which is where you get the most points on the exam, is figuring out how the facts of my hypothetical of Muffy being fiercely loyal, but also being 12 years old, being someone I just took for a walk and not intending to hurt anybody, how do those compare to other cases that interpret dangerous instruments? So that's the A. And then your conclusion is the yes/no answer to your issue of whether Muffy is a dangerous instrument. Now, without going on too long, I just want to say, I'm sensitive from podcasts about talking too much without a break for the other person, but without going on too long, I want to say that on an exam, we'll give you 2 points for the issue, 2 points for the rule, 4 points for the analysis, and 1 point for the conclusion. I'll give you 2 points for the conclusion making for 10 points. If you miss the analysis, you only get a 60%. Every student will get the rule right. You don't have to go to law school to know the rule. The rules are in every book that you can buy, and I'm not adverse to buying the help books. The rules are on the internet. We know that if you got into law school, you can memorize the rules. The question is, can you apply those rules? And that's the analysis. And that comes from understanding that in law school, we're asking you to learn to think differently.
Gotcha. So the analysis is definitely the key part of that. It has the plurality of the point value there. Now, students, obviously, they're going to want to review, they're going to want to learn this analysis on their own, but at the same time, it always helps to have outside resources, and the professor's only, a certain number of hours per week. What resources or books would you recommend for students who are looking for another more detailed take on whether they're analyzing the case correctly or whether they're spotting all the issues?
All right, so number one, almost every school in the country has an academic support professional. And the job of the academic support professional is to help students learn how to be good law students. And I cannot emphasize enough, going back to your point about the gunners, if you want to get good grades in law school, the key is not to learn the law. The key is not to read every note case referenced in the notes. The key is to learn how to be a good law student. So as far as being a good law student, then the first thing you can do is you can reach out to your academic support professional. There's a great book, oh gosh, I have it now, I don't know where it is, but it's by Jane Grise, Grise, and it's called Critical Reading I think it's Critical Reading is in the title, but it's a great way to learn how to read a case critically for law school. That would be something you could do. Oh, I have 2 books for recommending over the summer. So I would recommend Jane Grise's book, and the other book I highly recommend is Richard Wydick's Plain English for Lawyers, which teaches you how to write a law like a law student, which, believe it or not, is not saying the beautiful white cat tripped slowly across the lush green lawn. It's to say the cat walked. And you know what? You could do Richard Wydick's book at the beach. It's that easy, but it's a good refresher to teach you how to write like a law student. After that, I don't have any one particular book to recommend. I think if you want to get some resources, this is before you go to law school, then you can get good books on briefing. Once you're in law school, as I said, I am not adverse to getting a commercial bar, not a commercial bar, not that. I'm not adverse to getting a 1L commercial book. So there's a company called Gilbert's that puts one out. There's a company called Emmanuel's, and they kind of give you what we call the black letter law, which is the rules. There's a great series called Aspen's Examples and Explanations, and it's just a series of mini practice questions that test you. For those going to law school, let me just tell you that if you get a multiple choice question, the multiple choice question is not going to be a dangerous instrument is A, a cat, B, a dog, C, a cow. And it's not going to be, in order to prove murder, you need to do A, intent, B, reckless, C, negligence. Your multiple choice question is going to be, Leslie took her fiercely loyal puppy, Muffy, on a walk to see her neighbor, who she knew she was going to have words with. The dog bit the neighbor during a fight. What results? And then there's going to be 4 choices.
Gotcha. Okay. So thank you so much, by the way, for sharing all those in-depth examples of resources. I'm sure that people are really going to find it helpful, because I'm always getting questions. What exactly should I get? People are a lot of gunners out there. They really do want to get the specifics and know what to use, what not to use. So it sounds like there are some resources in particular. The one on Plain English for Lawyers, you were talking about it. It was reminding me of George Orwell's essay on writing clearly and succinctly.
Right. And I do want to say one other thing. And I have to say that when you graduate, you have to take the bar exam. And make sure if you get 1L materials by bar exam companies, that those 1L materials are meant for 1L students and not for bar students.
Yeah, that makes sense. I would imagine that 1L for 1L students would go into a bit more depth.
Yes, correct.
Beyond just what you need for the bar exam in particular.
Correct.
So you mentioned that you're not really a fan of necessarily the summer before 1L prep courses, but you do teach one. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, are there any insights or quick tips you could share from what you teach there? Maybe the first class session, any highlights that you could share with our audiences now?
So again, what I teach, what we do in this course, which just for your listeners is open in New York State to any diversity student. So it could be economics diversity, it could be it could be socioeconomic diversity, it could be racial diversity, it could be gender diversity. It's open to anybody. You have to apply through New York Judicial Institute, and basically they pay you to go to this. And the reason why New York State has this is to increase diversity in the profession. But what we do is we do a mini 6-week session. And the focus of the mini 6-week session, again, is how to learn how to be a law student. So one of the other things, I know part of my lame analogy, but are you familiar with Harry Potter?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so there's muggles and wizards, right? So I say that students, when they start law school, are muggles, and the goal is to be, when you graduate, a wizard, to know that thing that nobody else really knows. And so I teach my students how to be wizards. So basically through teaching tort, which is a civil wrong course about, slip and fall, intentional hitting someone, what have you. I teach students how to brief cases and how to read cases critically. So without going to the course, without taking a course, as I said, if you get Professor Griset's book and you learn how to read critically, and if you get a book on how to brief a case, and you learn both reading critically and briefing cases, you are ahead of the game. The other thing you can do over the summer is you can relax. But one of the things you do not want to do is you don't want to get your case books and start reading ahead, because it's not necessary. You could brief the cases, but the reality is once you're in the law school classroom, you'll see that there may be nuances that you missed, and you also want it to be fresh. The other thing I've seen students do, which is a total waste of time, is that in the note cases of the books, they reference, for more information, read this law review article, or for more information, read this, case. Waste of time. A professor's never going to test you on that. That's in there for the person who really doesn't get something and wants to understand it better. I will, as I'm speaking to you, there is one thing you maybe could do. I don't think it's necessary, but if you're really anxious, then you can read the Nutshell series on particular topics to get familiarity with the topic before you go into the class.
Well, that sounds great. I'm really glad you're telling people where to go for extra resources and where not to go. I can easily imagine a lot of the gunners going to those footnotes and think they're getting ahead of the rest of the class by going down those rabbit holes. But what I'm really getting from you ultimately is that it's not about the facts. It's not about the rules. It's far more about the application and analysis, which you can't necessarily do in advance. That's something more guessing the professor will show you, and then maybe some additional resources along the way.
That is exactly right. And that's why we don't have distance learning that much in 1L year. Those a little bit, but it's really about, I have all these silly analogies. I'm embarrassed now that I'm hearing myself, but we are your trainer for the mind. So as I explained to my students, you can't get great biceps without lifting weights over a period of time. Your mind can't be trained to think like a lawyer without practicing it over and over. And that's why you're in the classroom. I do want to say one other thing. I personally think laptops in the classroom in law school is the worst thing you can do. And I can tell you that I every year take a poll, and my students who do best in law school are the ones who don't have laptops. And the reason why is because laptops let you become a stenographer. And again, we are not teaching to be a stenographer. Talk to any 1L law student and they will tell you that one of the biggest shocks was the fact that very little of their notes made it into the exam, because it's really about thinking.
I'm really glad you raised that point, because aside from technology being a distraction, it's also changing the way that you interpret what's going on in the classroom. People just want to record everything like a transcript of what the professor said instead of thinking through it in the moment. And that's aside from all the potential distractions of the internet, which of course is not really necessary for the classroom itself.
It's true. It's funny. I had a luncheon with my colleagues today, and I tape all my courses. And I don't care. I don't have an attendance problem. First of all, the American Bar Association doesn't let you miss more than 5 classes. I don't allow laptops, but I tape every class. And the reason I tape the class is so the student can go ahead and listen again. And the reason I do that is because I want them to focus in class on just thinking. Sometimes I'll make them put their pen down and, everyone twitches. But I just want people to think, to think through a hypothetical. And sometimes I'll ask a question and I'll make everyone think what their answer would be before I get to call on the person.
That's a really great technique. I love that. I wish more professors would do that. No laptops, even put your pen down, just focus and participate on what's going on in the classroom.
Right.
Another big takeaway I've gotten from our conversation here is the idea of not memorizing facts, but thinking about how to think, learning a style of analysis, because that has so many parallels to LSAT preparation as well. It's not about memorization. It's not about flashcards. It's about changing the way that you think and analyze arguments, learning to think more critically and extracting the general principles.
And Steve, you just brought up a point that is so important for your students and people taking the LSAT. The reason why the LSAT is one of the criteria for getting into law school is because we want to know what your ability to analyze is. We know you can memorize, but the fact that the same skill set is being tested is no accident. We're looking for the same skill. And you know, I say to my students sometimes that the very thing that got them into law school, memorizing, all the facts to get a good GPA, does just a tiny bit for you to do well in law school. And that's the story.
Definitely. Well, before we sign off, I have one request for you, one idea. You mentioned that you're taping all your lectures. Have you given any consideration to putting them on your podcast? Because I'm sure that a lot of the gunners want to listen already.
Well, it's funny you should say that. And you bring up 2 points. We have a few more minutes, right? All right, so 2 points. One point is that, my students asked me the other day, one of my classes, if they could be on my podcast, and we've decided that we're going to tape a class to show what a Socratic method is actually like. Which brings me to one of the things I wrote down just now that I wanted to say to you. One of the matters that causes the most anxiety for law students is being called in a class. Because you're in, and again, watch the movies. Or even if you just, I'll tell you another 3 movies. Google First Day of Class, Legally Blonde. Google First Day of Class, The Paper Chase. And also Google Denzel Washington, Tell It to Me in 2 Minutes. Did you ever see the movie Philadelphia?
A long time ago.
Yeah, it's an older movie. So in Philadelphia, Tom Hanks is this fancy white shoe corporate lawyer, and he has contracted AIDS, and he believes he was unfairly discriminated and fired from this fancy law firm, and he's suing them for employment discrimination, going up against this law firm. No one will take his case. This is in the 90s when AIDS was fairly new. And he can't get anyone to take his case. So he goes to Denzel Washington, who is this like schlocky, for lack of a better word, lawyer. It says toxic torts behind him. And Tom Hanks in character is explaining very eruditely what happened to him. And Denzel Washington leans back like this and he goes, "I don't get it, counselor. Tell it to me like I'm a 2-year-old. And that's what I tell my students to do on exams. Don't write for the professor, write for a client, because that's what we're looking for. The other thing I wanted to point out is that, so I guess getting back to before, when you're called on in class, you're in a class of 50 to 70 to 100 students, and you're called on, and it's the most anxiety-provoking experience. And you're so worried you're going to get it wrong. But every time you're not called on, you know the answer. And that's because I always say it's like playing Jeopardy. At home, you can do well, but when you're on Jeopardy, you can't do well at all. So know that when you're called on in class, you're going to always remember that case, and you're going to learn that case better than anyone. But that everyone else out there is not thinking about whether you're right or wrong. They're just thinking, thank goodness it's not me.
Definitely true. I can definitely relate to that. Great.
So, yeah, I'm sorry. So I don't know if I answered the question you asked, but I answered the questions I wanted to ask, I guess.
No, I appreciate that. For those listening on my podcast, are there any particular episodes of your podcast that they should start with in order to get a good grounding in the basics of what law school will be like for them?
Well, we just, I have a couple, what it's like to be a first-year law student. I have my top 10 tips for doing well in law school. I have a couple law students talking about what they did the summer before the law school. I have 2 different ones, a podcast by professors about how to achieve success in law school. So I have a website, www.lawtofact.com. And if you go on that and you click on academic support, there's all those kind of podcasts for students who are starting law school. As far as I have substantive podcasts for law students. We talk about Erie doctrine, which is something you're tested on, and we talk about homicide. Those, I think, are best for when you're in law school. You'll appreciate them more when you're in law school. Welcome to listen to them ahead, but you would always appreciate them more when you're in law school.
Definitely. Well, thanks so much for putting this great material out, the Law to Fact podcast. And I'm especially looking forward to the episode with the Socratic methods done live in the classroom. I think it'll be really valuable for everyone.
Well, thank you. I think you just pushed it up a few weeks. I'll have to get it out sooner. And I look forward to publishing my discussion with you on my podcast, which will be out this Tuesday.
Great. Looking forward to it. And for those listening elsewhere, you can find this podcast. It'll be on LSAT Unplugged, which is my LSAT podcast. And Professor Tenzer, thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Take care.
Bye-bye.